Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 24th of April 2025. This is a military aid video, one I haven't done for a few days, so we've got a few bits to add in here. Well, actually not as much as one might hope. It's been quite quiet on the aid front for a few days and weeks actually. We do have a few bits of analysis on stuff like artillery, though, so that hopefully will be interesting for you. Right, we're going to start with Denmark. They're sending 42.5 million euros or thereabouts worth of artillery shells to Ukraine as part of its 25th aid package. The supply will go through Estonia. Defense Minister Troels Lund Poulsen said, "We must continue to support Ukraine so it can resist Russian aggression." Absolutely. We hear that Luxembourg and Iceland, two of the smallest members of the EU and allies of Ukraine, in fact, Iceland doesn't even have an army, they've donated equipment worth almost 2 million euros to Ukraine. 3,288 access points of various models, 500 routers, 460 charging stations with solar panels, 872 phones. So thank you very much to those two nations. Japan is to provide, as I've mentioned before, Ukraine with geospatial intelligence. According to the media, Japan's Kyushu University Institute for Kyushu Pioneers of Space, IQPS, has agreed to provide Ukraine's military intelligence agency, the GUR or HUR, depending on how it's transcribed, with synthetic aperture radar, SAR imagery. SAR imagery. Intelligence Online magazine reported on the 21st of April. So this is good. Although it's a small company, the IQPS, it's a Japanese space startup. Its technological prowess is world class, says someone here. It embodies the spirit of Japanese craftsmanship, like the protagonist of a movie. I'm proud of its humanitarian support for Ukraine, says that Japanese supporter there. But it'd be interesting to see whether Ukraine are going to be able, the allies of Ukraine are going to be able to close that capability gap if the US step away from intelligence sharing. That, to me, is one of the most important questions that needs to be answered. And first of all, whether the US will step away in that big a way. Now, Jeff 2146 has his own kind of list, kind of a bit like Oryx's list of stuff that's been delivered and pledged. He's got delivered an unknown number of Volvo N10 wreckers seen in service with the 508 separate repair and restoration battalion coming from Belgium. But at least one of them is there, as you can see in this bit of footage. But he's like, yeah, unknown number of them, but good news that they are in Ukraine, or it is in Ukraine. The UK will purchase drones worth 40 million from New Zealand. SYOS Aerospace to support Ukraine, thanks, cuz. So nice one, New Zealand. Look, it's really good to see some Kiwi support for Ukraine. UK really coming in to order some stuff from New Zealand. Look, the Kiwis here are staunch supporters of Ukraine, but we're a long way away, right? And really appreciate that the UK is buying some stuff from us. So it's really choice. Nice. Or something. Right, the Kiwi Prime Minister was in UK speaking with Keir Starmer, and they were talking about support for Ukraine recently, so that's good news, and I assume that's come out of that. $40 million worth of drones from New Zealand for Ukraine. Retired London ambulances have been donated to Ukraine as well. Fantastic. 59 decommissioned ambulances have been donated to Ukraine by the London Ambulance Service since the start of the war in 2022. So that's just in London alone. Ambulances which are helping to provide care for those in war zones or civilians injured have been handed over to the charity British Ukrainian Aid. The latest donation of 9 ambulances has now been delivered to the front line, says the BBC. Chris Rutherford from LAS said, "We are very proud to do this, and our thoughts remain with our counterparts working on ambulances caring for those injured in the conflict." And of course, they could have been used last night because Kiev and many places around Ukraine were absolutely hammered by the Russians. Pretty despicable strikes. So good stuff there. And talking about that sort of aid, we have French aid to Ukraine, saying the city of Orleans, which is twinned with Sumy, contributed to the delivery of a lorry of humanitarian aid to the latter. And it clearly includes a van there as well. Medical Aid Committee needs donations. This helps to meet urgent needs. This is the case in Sumy. So excellent, très bien fait, la France au Léon, excellent. UK plans to increase production of 155mm artillery shells by 16 times to reduce dependence on the US. This is not the only thing that we're hearing about the UK trying to diverge from its dependence on the US, diverge from the US. Here, an increase in artillery ammunition production by 16 times is pretty significant. And then we hear that German arms manufacturing giant Rheinmetall's new plant in Unterlüß, will nearly double initial production goals, producing up to 350,000 artillery shells a year, up from the forecasted 200,000. I think I reported that recently. Germany's defense industry continues to rapidly build up capacity. Okay, so those two things then feed into this bit of an analysis we're going to go through from Conflict Capital here. So, ammunition breakthrough, the maths behind Europe's artillery surge in early 2024, the picture was bleak. So US supplies had ceased entirely, though they had delivered twice as much as the EU since the war began, 2 million versus 1 million rounds. Europe struggled to scale up production. Ukraine lacked sufficient domestic manufacturing capacity, and Russia was receiving massive ammunition shipments from North Korea, over 1 million rounds. But as of Q1 2025, things look very different. So a year's been a very long time in artillery ammunition production. The US contribution now consists solely of pre-contracted aid from the previous administration. No new packages are on the table. So all that ramping up of production in the US, you wonder what's going to happen with that. Pennsylvania, are they going to have to sack some people from manufacturing there and many of these other plants around the US? Or will the Trump administration realize that there is an economic stimulus involved in supporting Ukraine? But anyway, the US contribution now consists of pre-contracted aid. Europe has become the main supplier. Just yesterday, news broke that British defence firm BAE Systems is launching a new line in Glasgow. They're expected to boost output 16-fold from pre-COVID levels, with deliveries to Ukraine starting this autumn. Similar announcements have come from Germany's Rheinmetall, major expansion underway, and Denmark's Nammo, which is restarting a shuttered factory in northern Denmark to produce both small and large caliber rounds. Currently, STV Group from Czechia is in partnership with Rheinmetall and can produce around 1 million shells annually. Nammo adds another 360,000. In short, Europe is in a far stronger position than a year ago, though supply still hasn't caught up with the battlefield demand. Projected capacity by 2026, so at the end of this year, BAE Systems will have 500,000 at 155mm a year from the UK. Rheinmetall from Germany, 750,000, with expansion to 1.1 million by 2027. Next, KNDS France will have 100,000 shells and 96,000 casings via Forge de Tarbes, and that's been really ramped up. PGZ from Poland is targeting 150,000, and STV from Czechia stabilizing at 150,000 themselves. So that's a combined 2 million shells per year, enough to support 5,000 to 5,500 daily rounds. And that's a real increase from where they have been out throughout the war, if all were shipped to Ukraine, especially when factoring Ukraine's own 152mm output. For comparison, Russian firepower has declined. Moscow's current rate is around 12,000 rounds a day. Propped up heavily by North Korea, which now accounts for 45% of Russian artillery supplies. The Russian machine is incapable of sustaining 2 million rounds annually on its own. Back in Europe, the production surge is being powered by the EU's ASAP, Act in Support of Ammunition Production Programme, nice, a blend of long-term offtake contracts and co-finance purchases of critical equipment, hydraulic presses, ovens, etc. Yet key bottlenecks do remain. Explosive materials like TNT, RDX, IMX 104 and nitrocellulose for propellants. Of course, as I reported the other day, BAE Systems is looking at producing a new type of explosive or something that doesn't use nitrocellulose, so they don't rely on the US, China, etc. That's changing. Rheinmetall Nitrochemie has opened a third nitration line in Aschau. BAE is rolling out containerized RDX micro factories across the UK and at the Holston AAP in the US. Urenco PB Clermont is doubling output of energetic materials. Together, these efforts could raise Europe's artillery ceiling to 2.4 million shells a year by 2026, but full impact will be felt only next year. Until then, every batch of explosives is being still being carefully allocated across plants. Meanwhile, Ukraine is ramping up too. Since August 2024, a joint Rheinmetall-Yuko-Boronprom 155mm line has been operational, aiming to produce 80 to 100,000 shells this year. State-owned Artem and several private firms are scaling up output of Soviet-era calibers of 152mm and 122mm shells. So in just 3 years, Europe has gone from almost handmade production in 2022 to output levels rivaling China's. If projections hold, Europe's annual 155mm shell production will jump from 250 to 300,000 to 2 million by 2026. So that's a really good analysis there. So thank you for that, Conflict Capital. Okay, moving on, we have Ukraine plans to compensate for the shortage of soldiers in the AFU by actively introducing combat robotic systems on the battlefield, according to the Telegraph. I talked about this the other day, although actually the headline doesn't really say that. So Ukraine's robot army is a glimpse of future warfare. Developers say technology is not about replacing infantry, but integrating machines into military operations to gain the edge against Russia. I would say it probably is, though. They really are struggling for boots on the ground, and where it takes a human soldier 25 years to construct, well, it's 25 years in the making, right? So your mobilization starts after the age of 25 in Ukraine. So that's, each soldier, you have to wait 25 years and then train it. Whereas one of these robots, if it's doing the job of a soldier, or maybe even two soldiers, that's taking how long to make? A few months? A month? A week? I don't know. But you see the advantage of replacing soldiers with robots on the front line in terms of costs. So as well, compensation to families with the death of a soldier, and the psychological loss as well, or maybe rehabilitation for someone who's lost a limb. These costs really do mount up. Robots are going to replace human beings to a significant degree on the front line, and that should be good for saving lives, right, for the Ukrainians here. The Snake robot here shown is controlled by an operator from a bunker a few kilometers from the front line, moves above the ground, neutralizing Russian mines in its path. So you can have a demining UGV, unmanned ground vehicle. You can have a machine gun, heavy machine guns. We've seen attacks being supported by UGVs with machine guns. You can have, I guess you can put a man-pad on them, man portable air defense system. You can have stretchers. You can have supply robots. The Snake is just one of the models that will be included in the arsenal of 15,000 robots, which, according to Kiev, will be deployed in the front this year. So I think this year is going to be the year of the UGV, the unmanned ground vehicle. Now, talking about a UAV, Roy says, he's a good source, this Canadian chap, a good source on usually stuff to do with drones. A Ukrainian radio repeater drone can adjust the set angle of the antennas relative to the horizon with a 30 degree, plus 30 to minus 30 degree range in automatic and manual modes. Directional integrity should allow a stronger signal to be received by an FPV for a longer range and increased jamming resistance. So that's a nice little evolution there for that particular Ukrainian drone. What else? Ukraine, together with international partners, will develop satellites for defense purposes in 2026, according to Deputy Minister of Defense Militiani. And you might think that this is ridiculous. Why are they focusing on satellites? But Ukraine is becoming one of the most experienced militaries in the world, but certainly in Europe. And it would be kind of ridiculous to think that they're going to have this very large and experienced armed forces, but without the capability of satellite intelligence gathering and so on and so forth. So sensibly going forward, the Ukrainians are going to need that kind of capability. The reliance on the US, as you can see, has been somewhat doomed, and they need to be independent, don't they? So interesting that they're doing this, but it doesn't surprise me, even though you might think, what are they doing worrying about that? Also, it's planned to create a space situational awareness system and integrate it into defense technologies. The final result for 2030 to 2035 is the creation of a satellite constellation for real-time analytics, says Max24. Now, the Times is reporting that Ukraine's drone vets secretly are now training the British Army who are stuck in the past. 3 years ago, Ukrainians arrived in Britain to train. Now they're back teaching drone warfare shaped by frontline battles with Russia, according to Euromaidan Press, referring to the Times there. Doesn't surprise me one iota. This is, of course, is going to happen, which is, as I say, the most experienced army in Europe are now going to be training their European allies, particularly on drones. I mean, their expertise in drones knows no, there is no equal. Reuters is reporting that Spain has vowed to meet NATO spending, the goal of 2% of GDP in 2025. So that's pretty significant. Not only is that what has been expected since 2014, and Spain are very much behind the curve on that, but if they do get there, that's a really significant overhaul. Spain spent just 1.28% of GDP on defences last year per NATO figures. A 0.72% increase in just 1 year is a very significant jump, says Colby Badwa. This is going to make other NATO deadbeats. And he says, who else do we have here? We've got, is that Croatia, Portugal, Italy, Canada, Belgium, is that Luxembourg, and I don't know if that's Slovenia there or Slovakia. Look quite bad. So Sanchez said he would meet the goal through additional spending of 10.47 billion euros, with a focus on increasing the size of its military, telecommunications, cybersecurity and procurement of military equipment. This plan will help us meet the target in record time, Sanchez said. Spain will contribute to defending Europe. European Commission has proposed allowing member states to raise defence spending by 1.5% of GDP a year for 4 years without punishing them for increasing their deficits, and wants them to pool resources on joint defence projects. So, of course, this is going to be in line with what Europe itself is doing in their kind of rearm project. Good news really for NATO, good news for Europe. Now, I hinted at this earlier. Europe pushes Trump-proof weapons free of US parts, according to the Times. So the British and European defence firms are wrapping up promotion of ITAR-Free weapons. ITAR-Free means that if you have a weapon, you can sell it on or give it on to any other nation, irrespective of any constraints. There are no constraints. Whereas at the moment, like, there are certain constraints. So say you buy a weapon off the US, you have to get the US's permission in order to give that to, I don't know, Ukraine, India, wherever you want to give it. To have ITAR-free weapons means that you have complete sovereignty over where that weapon goes. And that means you need to, if you're making it yourself, you need to make sure that all of those components are ITAR-free. So it's not just like the weapon as a whole, it's the component parts of this. This has this particular microchip, and the US says we'll sell you that microchip, but you can't use that in this context or that context, or give it to this country or that country. British and European defence firms are ramping up promotion of ITAR-free weapons systems built without US components to avoid potential export restrictions under a possible second Trump presidency. In other words, this is the Trump effect on UK and European defence technology and manufacturing, and that is a dent for US exports. So those components are now no longer going to be desired by European nations from the US. It's just too risky. And yeah, that's Trumponomics. Now, Keir Starmer and Ursula von der Leyen will on Thursday finalise plans for a new UK-EU defence pact and an agreement on the sensitive area of fishing rights, paving the way for negotiations on a broader economic deal. As I keep saying, and I'm trying not to be too overtly pro-Remain. So as a Remainer, I wanted the UK to stay in the EU for a whole bunch of different reasons, but mainly kind of economic and administrative in terms of you solve global problems with global solutions. And jumping out of the EU puts us as a minnow in a big choppy sea full of sharks. And we then have to do all these separate trade deals. That we had the best trade deals with the EU because they're one of the biggest trade blocs in the world, or the biggest trade bloc in the world. And we then have to renegotiate all those deals from a position of less power, much smaller entity dealing with these bigger entities and getting swallowed up. So what we need to do in order to grow our economy at required levels in order to balance our books, essentially the only option we really have is to get closer with the EU at the moment. So the question is, how do we do that? One of the sticking points in the Brexit negotiations was, my dad was a really good example of this. Like, one of the reasons he wanted, he had a lot of complete disinformation that he was fed. And I was fighting that quite often. But one of the things he was really keen on was fishing rights. Like the EU and UK had this really contentious relationship regarding fishing rights and whether, French trawlers could come in our waters and whatnot. And it looks like while we've got those rights back now, that it might be a case of giving some of those rights to the EU in order to get closer in terms of defence. In other words, our fishing industry is potentially being at least somewhat sacrificed to the altar of a larger economic project and defence project as well. And that could well annoy Brexiteers, could well annoy the fishing industry. So we'll have to see how that goes. But, there's always going to be concessions when you're doing a negotiation, a true proper negotiation, not having something forced on you like the US is doing with Ukraine, but a proper negotiation where both sides make concessions. Right, okay. Going on to Russian stuff now. And the other day I reported that a particular German entity, I don't know, corporation or something, EKC, was providing Russia and had been providing Russia with a whole lot of chromium that allows them to produce weaponry. To be clear, says Zealand Night. I don't know. I will have to open that in a new tab because here we go. Zelendak Nightblade. Okay, so Zelendak Nightblade says, to be clear, EKC is based in Würzburg, quite close to where I live, and was founded by two Russians, Evgeny Poroknya, CFO, and Vladimir Platonov, the CEO. A third Russian, Oleg Krylov, is also part of the leadership team, with many of the 21 employees also reported to use Russian as their primary language. The chromium exports took place between January 23 and April 24 and amounted to a little over 24 million, which accounted for more than half of Russia's imports during that period. They were technically legal at the time, since the EU did not get around to banning the metal until February 2025. This was one of a number of glaring sanction loopholes that were used extensively by Western companies and should have been closed within the first year of the war. I downloaded the sanction targets document from the official UK government website, but unfortunately it did not explain the discrepancy. I will keep my eyes and ears open in the German media space to see if I can clear up whether there were any legal transgressions or just unethical actions taking advantage of poor lawmaking. This is brilliant. That's why I love the community here. You guys are experts. I know nothing about this, right? So I love the fact that this is some kind of open source sharing of information. So thank you so much, Zelendak, for that. Appreciated. As I reported the other day, Russian troops are using Chinese-made 56-1 rifles, copies of the Soviet AKM with a folding stock. One of these rifles was captured by Ukrainian forces near Toretsk. It's brand new and oiled. So there are these claims, and Zelensky was supposed to be this week coming out with more evidence, although he might have been sidetracked by the negotiations. Evidence of how China are supporting Russia in their arms manufacturing and procurement. Anatoly Krapchinsky, Deputy Director of the Electronic Warfare Production Company, stated that Russia is modernising its X-59, X-101 and X-555 missiles. Quote, significant changes have been made to the X-101 and X-555 cruise missiles, allowing them to avoid any external interference. Russia has also modified the X-59 missile into the X-69 by increasing its range, he explained. And this is bad news, but of course it's going to be happening throughout the war. You have the measure, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure arms race. Here we have an evolution of the missiles that Russia was producing and giving them extra capabilities as the war goes on. Now, yesterday we heard that the Yalabuga drone manufacturing facility was hit. There are some claims that maybe 80% of the... rubbish. I'm talking about that's the ammunition depot. This is the Yalabuga drone manufacturing facility. Some claims that 5 out of 6 of the drones hit the target, and that the end production line was hit, the assembly line at the end. But I don't know, those are just rumours. Ukraine's General Staff has confirmed a precision strike on the Russian drone production plant over 1,000 kilometres from the border in Tatarstan, which produces 300 Shahid-type drones daily. So it's a really big facility, and I've been saying for a couple of years, ever since it was the Ukrainians first attempted to hit it with a couple of drones, they didn't really succeed. I was like, that has to be target number one. Why are the Ukrainians not attacking that? And especially when they're getting up to sending 200 drones nightly into Ukraine, you're thinking that has to be target number one, and lo and behold, it's been hit. It'd be really interesting to see if that has an effect on the drones being sent into Ukraine on a nightly basis. The exact damage is yet to be determined there. What else? The media, unclarified media, according to the Kyiv Independent, identifies over 1,500 foreign mercenaries from 48 countries that Russia has recruited for the war in Ukraine, which is, not insignificant, certainly in a number of countries. My goodness, that's quite an international net that they have thrown to the world to try and catch as many foreign mercenaries, potential fighters, as possible. Now, the UK has banned exports of gaming console controllers to Russia because they're being used to pilot drones in Ukraine. Part of a new package of 150 sanctions, also targeting tech for oil and gas exploration. Excellent news from the UK there. That's on the cards, on a gas exploration tech. And really, what we'd like is the EU to be doing that as well. And the US, well, that would be nice, wouldn't it? But I don't think we can expect that to happen, sadly enough. Anyway, that's enough from me for this military aid video. Hopefully it was informative. Thank you so much for your support. If you can continue to support Car for Ukraine, as Michael Winkler has, who I have to thank him personally, he supports the channel really well. We are in 4th place now, ahead of Rick the Ukrainian and the Shields, and delightfully ahead of Jonathan Finkett's Silicon Curtain. And we're on the way to achieving our goal. We're much closer now than we were, obviously, a few days ago. So that's marvellous. Thank you so much. And you can check the donor wall here. And as I say, Michael Winkler, thank you so much. And also the other day, someone donated a whopping 2,300 spondoolies. So that is incredibly generous. So many of you guys are just, well, you're all wonderful humans. So thank you for that. Anyway, in the meantime, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Oh, and you haven't seen my face for this whole video. Oh well. Here I am. Hello.